perennial challenge is the question of how best can we learn how to respond in situations of natural disaster. There are many challenges about developing a strong evidence base for disaster relief, disaster response. There's challenges related to how to do research in these contexts. And actually, we've conducted a research study where we've been interviewing researchers who have conducted research in situations of disaster. There's a second layer of challenge, which is how disaster research interfaces with our common way of doing oversight of research. So the research ethics committee system that's in place. And we've interviewed research ethics committee members from around the world who have experience reviewing disaster protocols, trying to understand how we can best adjust or adapt, correspond the research ethics review process to the realities of disaster research. And the results of this research project have really been to try and identify elements or characteristics that constitute a sort of a high quality response to disaster research. And what we hear are three things: that to review disaster research protocols effectively, the reviews need to be timely, they need to be responsive, and they need to be rigorous. And timeliness, the first one, is a consistent concern amongst the reviewers that we talk to, because many of these protocols need to be rolled out very quickly in the first couple of weeks after a disaster occurs. And so emphasizing the importance of timeliness, yet recognizing that many of the procedures that are in place don't afford that type of quick response. And so these research ethics committees, many of them have innovated in a number of ways, adapted their procedures. For example, conducting pre-reviews of generic protocols before a disaster occurs, and then after the disaster, then doing a specific review for the context. So pre-review of a protocol to be conducted in an earthquake setting, and then after the earthquake has occurred in a locality, then conducting a second part of the review. So that's a really cutting edge adaptation that only a few research ethics committees have implemented to date. But there are a number of other more everyday type of adaptations, from moving these protocols up in the queue for review to waiving deadlines, things of this nature. The second type of concern relates to what we've described as responsiveness, and this has two concerns or considerations. One is that the reviewers have adequate knowledge of disaster research, which isn't necessarily the case for many research ethics committees, that there are specificities to disaster research and disaster settings that are important to know about. Everything from the need for methodological innovation in many disaster research protocols to how risk profiles, the nature of risks, might shift and evolve over time after a disaster event occurs. The second piece, so knowing about disaster research, the second is also a question of being able to have some understanding of the local setting, where has this disaster occurred in terms of social, cultural, political context. And that's also difficult to achieve, not just for research ethics committees that are in other countries that might be reviewing, or at international organizations, but we also heard this in the localities where the disaster has occurred. It might be in a region of the country, it might be amongst a community, and even there we might struggle to understand what is the situation in a disaster. Now, the third piece of the puzzle was maintaining due rigor, having rigorous due scrutiny for the review that's conducted. So wanting to balance off needing to go quickly or being timely with also achieving sufficient rigor in the review that was provided. A second piece that's important and distinctive to this context is also maintaining the independence of research ethics committees. So we heard that in the context of a disaster where the political situation might be tense, there might be efforts or there might be political agendas that might seek to influence research that's conducted or even research ethics review. And we heard an important emphasis on maintaining the independence of research ethics review. So we have those pieces of due scrutiny and also independence. So bringing it together, what we're starting to see is really a portrait of effective research ethics review for disaster protocols that combines timeliness, responsiveness, and rigor, and really looking at a situation where we might be innovating or adapting processes and procedures and yet maintaining the principles and the values that underlie, so we have this sufficient scrutiny, this careful scrutiny to make sure that populations, individuals are protected in the context of research.